Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Gaming Grappler. You know what I find fascinating? The internet's effect and impact on video game development. And one of the easiest ways you could see that effect and impact was on the indie side of video game development. It used to be that ground zero for indie gaming, especially in the West, was on Flash games. And for all you Zoomers out there, a Flash game was a small video game. It had a small file size, so you could easily play it in browser. It was running on proprietary software. Adobe Flash Player also had a lot of problems. It was full of a lot of vulnerabilities, and often these games were hosted on sketchy websites that were infested in malware. But one of the upsides to Flash games was that it was this experimental test facility for beginner indie devs to see what worked and what didn't work on a public forum. A lot of these public forums were websites like Newgrounds, and Newgrounds had this negative reputation, mostly thanks to the constant fear-mongering campaigns on boomer news stations. But aside from that, for a lot of young people, this website was great for experimenting in indie game development. As a matter of fact, if you're playing a popular indie game nowadays, it probably had a prototype on Newgrounds. Games like Super Meat Boy, Castle Crashers, Alien Hominoid, and yes, even Hollow Knight have a prototype game on Newgrounds. There was clearly something special about Newgrounds and all the other Flash game hosting websites out there. And I think that special thing was just the era in which it took part in. It was the Wild West era of the internet, where things weren't monopolized to three major companies. Because let's face it, if you're using the internet now, you're probably doing it through either an Apple or a Google phone running through an Amazon web server. But it didn't used to always be like that. It used to be that there were thousands of websites and thousands of hosting web providers, and all of them were in constant competition with one another. And that competition fostered creativity and ingenuity, where people were constantly trying to fight for that top slot. On a small scale, it seems to me that all these Flash gaming websites had the same level of competition and freedom, where creators were always trying to create something new, funny, and original, and that creative spark had a lot of potential. It's one of the reasons why Hollow Knight would evolve from a Flash game to the indie success story that we see today. Now listen, I'm not telling you to go boot up all those old school Flash games, because let's be honest here, a lot of them have not aged well in the slightest. But if I wanted to tell you the best way you could experience that same sort of anarchy and creative freedom, I would tell you to go play My Friend Pedro. It's a modern game that you could buy right now on Steam and Good Old Games, and it doesn't have any of the old problems that you see from Flash gaming of old. But before I get this review up and started, I gotta get the self-promotion out of the way. Please like, comment, and subscribe to the Gaming Grappler. The more this channel grows, the more time, effort, and dedication I can give to delivering you guys content on a consistent and regular basis. The history for My Friend Pedro is actually pretty interesting. My Friend Pedro was created by a solo indie developer by the name of Victor Orger. My apologies to all Swedes out there. I'm not really good at speaking Viking. And this series originally had its origins as a Flash game that came out in 2014, published by Adult Swim Games. And both the Flash game and the retail version that came out in 2019 were heavily influenced by all the run-and-gun games that were heavily featured on Newgrounds. Games like Madness, created by Kringles. And that series, by the way, is still going on strong to this day. It makes me feel kind of old, but a common feature for all those run-and-gun shooters is that the platforming was heavily physics-based, and the aiming was done manually with a keyboard and a mouse and was meant to be precise. And what I like about Victor's games is that me and this guy are kindred spirits, and a common feature for My Friend Pedro is that this game was based off of the stylish action movies that I grew up on. Movies like The Matrix, Shoot 'Em Up, and Equilibrium were some of my favorite movies ever made. And if you don't know what a stylish action movie is, a stylish action movie is a movie that doesn't really put too much of an emphasis on realism. All the fight scenes are primarily designed to look cool. They're well choreographed, both on the hand-to-hand combat scenes and when they're using guns. There's a huge emphasis on acrobatics and slow motion effects, and it's one of my favorite genres of filmmaking out there, and it's one of the most complicated genres of filmmaking out there. The Raid was notoriously known to be one of the most difficult and expensive movies to film. That's one of the reasons why the director of that film decided to make it in Indonesia. And the thing is, My Friend Pedro is trying to capture the feel of a stylish action movie, but with the tone and atmosphere of a goofy Newgrounds game. And in that regard, it definitely sticks the landing. The story and premise for My Friend Pedro is primarily focused around being funny. It has the same sort of tone and atmosphere as something you would play in a 2007 Newgrounds Flash game. The plot for this game is that the player character has amnesia and wakes up randomly in an abandoned warehouse when out of nowhere, the flying psychic projection of a talking banana tells the player character that they have to kill people, and he tells them how to do that. And for whatever reason, you just go along with it. So I think it's pretty safe to say that the story in this game is just a vehicle for action set pieces. Like, this is clearly a gameplay over story experiences. But with that being said, there were still plenty of funny plot twists along the way that had me laughing that I'm not going to mention to you because they're complete spoilers. I would also like to give Victor a round of applause for handling comedy as well as he did in this game. It would be very easy to overwrite it like Borderlands 3, but that wasn't the case for Pedro. Pedro seems to know its place as a gameplay over story experiences, and most of the funny things that happened in my playthrough were a result of me interacting with the environments or the funny set pieces in the game's level design. So I have to give Victor a round of applause because it would be very easy to make the game overly edgy and overly obnoxious, and he did neither of those things. So yeah, the guy nailed it here. Of course, the music for this game is awesome. It's an Indi Devolver Digital type of game, and the music is a retro synthwave aesthetic. It's the same type of thing that you've seen in Hotline Miami, but it does diversify throughout the game. Again, this is a funny game, and there are a lot of funny scenes where the music changes genres, and it fixed the tone and the setting appropriately. Like, it can go full metal for certain boss fights or drop it all for a sense of humor. And I'd like to say, just like Hotline Miami, when this game gets difficult, it can put the player in a trance-like state where they're vibing to the music and trying to get as much kills as possible. So again, the music for this game is phenomenal. If I had to sum up the main premise of My Friend Pedro's gameplay, I would say it's to act out your fantasies as a stylish action movie protagonist. The game is just built around looking cool, stylish, and crazy. The gameplay is a 2D side-scroller shooter with bullet time mechanics and environmental physics and platforming. This is an arcade type of experience that you're going to want to S-rank every mission when you do it. Again, you're going to want to kill things and look good while you do it. But be warned, despite the fact that My Friend Pedro is a 2D side-scrolling action shooter, this game does not play anything like Mega Man X or Contra. And honestly, that took me a while to figure out. I only really began to properly enjoy My Friend Pedro on repeat playthroughs while I was trying to S-rank every mission. And in order to perform better in the game, I had to take things slow and learn how to play the game based off of its own merits. One of the things that players are going to have to get used to if they want to get good at My Friend Pedro is the fact that all the movement options in this game are entirely based on its physics system. Your character has a floaty jump, and if you want to learn how to platform effectively, you're going to have to learn how to use that floaty jump effectively. Even simple things like performing a wall jump in this game are a lot more complicated. There is nothing automated about the process. You're going to have to manually jump off the wall at a specific angle and then aim your character effectively. And while this does require a very slight learning curve to doing it, once you master it, it will give the player a greater degree of freedom and accuracy, which will in turn make you look even more cool during stylish action scenes. You also have to unlearn a lot of bad habits from other games. The dodge move in this game is mapped to the up key. And while that is pretty awkward to learn at first, once you master it, the dodge move in this game is very overpowered. It gives you a lot of invincibility frames, it lasts for a long time, and you can even shoot while doing it. So yeah, dodging is very awesome in My Friend Pedro. Believe it or not, aiming and accuracy is more important in My Friend Pedro than it is in one-hit death games like Contra. And there are two reasons for this. The first reason is that it's more stylish if the player can kill an enemy by performing a tricky shot. And the second reason is that all the enemies in My Friend Pedro have huge pools of health and they're highly aggressive, but the player can compensate for that advantage by getting a headshot, which will outright kill an enemy or kill it in fewer shots. And the player can also interact with the environment. If you shoot a gas can, you could take out a horde of enemies with one bullet, and that's just awesome. But to take advantage of this, I highly recommend the player play this game with the convenience and the use of a keyboard and a mouse, especially if you want to take advantage of this game's dual-wielding system. Right from the get-go, the player starts this game by dual-wielding pistols, and along the way, they can also unlock other weapons that can also be dual-wielded. And the system works like this. One of your guns can lock onto enemies by right-clicking them, and the other one will have to be manual aimed. And while that does sound pretty difficult, trying to shoot two different people on the screen with one mouse, it actually isn't, because this game features bullet time. And it wouldn't be a stylish action game if you couldn't slow things down and look cool, which will also give the player plenty of breathing room to try to aim and shoot at two enemies at once, which is pretty awesome. And while that does sound pretty overpowered, especially when you consider how long bullet time lasts in this game, it actually isn't. And that's mainly thanks to the way this game keeps track of your score. In order to increase your combo in this game, you have to continually chain enemy kills together. So if you make a mistake and decide to use bullet time while you're reloading or you're dodging, this will in turn interrupt your chance of continuing that chain, which will ruin your chances of getting an S rank. So actually timing when to slow things down and use bullet time really does matter in this game. If the first half of Pedro's gameplay is all about mastering your character's innate abilities, like slowing down time or dual-wielding weapons, or just mastering the physics-based mobility system, then the second half to that equation would just be using the environment to your advantage to act out your very own power fantasy as a stylish action hero protagonist. One of the most powerful moves in the game is the kick. If you use it up close, it's an instant kill, but this kick isn't just regulated to close quarters combat. You can also use it to deflect enemy projectiles or kick objects across the map. But the trick is, if you time it properly and you use it within the correct spacing, your object will be automatically aimed at an enemy's head, getting an instant headshot. So it's a nice little reward for the player to master their timing and their spacing skills. Now, I would like to briefly go over this game's physics system once again, because while I did mention its impact on the player's mobility and their movement options, I didn't say its effect on interacting with objects in the environment, because while simple things like swinging off of ropes and vines are easy in other games, that's mainly because that system is half automated, where the player will enter a preset animation when they swing off a vine. But in My Friend Pedro, that isn't the case, because the player has 100% control with the degree and the angle that they swing off of ropes. And while there is a very slight learning curve to learning how to do this, the reward is that the player has a greater degree of accuracy and control, which as a result of that ends up looking more stylish when fully mastered. Simple things like using barrels and shooting them has its own physics system. And you can also jump on those barrels and rub people over like you're some sort of Looney Tunes character. And while that does give you an instant kill, the trade-off to doing that is that your controls will be inverted. So every aspect of My Friend Pedro's combat is something that the player will have to learn over time. The only thing that came innately easy to me was ricocheting bullets because of how self-explanatory it is. Certain context-sensitive objects in this game you can bounce bullets off of. But the only real complicated thing about using that is when you factor in that the player can dual-wield their weapons and shoot two context-sensitive panels at the same time. But my favorite thing to shoot is the frying pan. It is hilariously overpowered. It just mows down enemies in front of you without barely any effort. There's a reason why this thing was heavily featured in most of the promotional material. But by far, the most rewarding object to interact with this game's environment is the skateboard. That's right, you could go full Tony Hawk while you mow down enemies, but the trade-off is is that the skateboard is one of the most complicated weapons you can use in the game. For starters, when you use this thing, the speed increases like tenfold. And while that happens, you have to factor in the way the player jumps. If you jump off the board incorrectly, you'll lose your footing and go airborne. You can also use this thing as a projectile weapon while you slow down time. So there's a lot of neat tech and techniques to take into account while you use the board. And the only real downside to it is that I wish there were more dedicated levels to using the skateboard. And now for what could be better, because there's nothing really bad about My Friend Pedro, but there's more I would like to see in a sequel type of game. For starters, your character can blend into the background, and this isn't a unique problem. It's a common problem for a lot of 2.5D side-scrollers, and an easy fix to this problem would just be to invert your character's color scheme, like have him have a yellow jacket and pants so he pops out more in the background. Keep in mind, this game is supposed to be crazy, so it wouldn't be that out of place with this game's tone and style. This game can also use a slide button. I'm not a big fan of the roll you do. I find it very slow and not very cool looking, and the slide is common in games like Wet or Vanquish, or maybe even Max Payne to a certain degree, but a slide move would be really enjoyed. But what this game really needs is a taunt button. Like, I find it jarring that after kicking a knife right back at an enemy's head, I can't give him the finger. I mean, it just needs to be in the game. A stylish taunt system like in Devil May Cry is highly needed in a My Friend Pedro sequel. After playing My Friend Pedro, I gotta say this game has the creative spirit of the Wild West internet, packaged and polished for modern audiences to enjoy.